So if we go back to the big process, again, it's analyzing standards first before you design that curriculum. Analyzing standards has a structure, vertical analysis, and unpacking. Designing the curriculum starts that conversation about school-wide assessment so that we're really able to have collaborative conversations on data, then looking at the units with the instructional sequence, and finally pacing it out. What I wanted to do today, in addition to putting it into the bigger framework, is to help see what's coming next. Not as a, I want you to go take this back and do it tomorrow in your school. Everyone's in their own place and that's fine. But by understanding the bigger picture about what's next, it helps us have a better understanding of where we are right now. Because again, it puts it back into that context. So that's how I intend for this information to be shared today. Not as a, I feel like I'm pressured to go do this in my school right now, but to again help see that bigger picture of where it's going. So what I wanted to do is, we went through that initial process with reading. What does it look like as I start it with writing? And I'm doing this for two reasons. One, so you can be aware of how well they tie together. Maybe we won't even look at it till August, and that's okay, but you're already aware of that bigger picture of how it ties together. But two, it's the same steps. So by going back to that step again, if I'm still way back on that with reading, I feel much more comfortable then on applying it in that context. So here we go. When we're going through the process, again, structure is always the first thing. So after reading, I want to look at writing. So remember, there were 4 strands across the board. I'm moving to my second strand with writing. If I say, how is writing structured? It starts out being structured just like reading. You have 10 CCR anchor standards. They like the number 10. That translates then into 10 grade-specific standards. So if I'm looking at standard number 1 in K or 5 or 8, that always corresponds to CCR anchor standard number 1. So you can clearly see the progression across the board. Here's the difference about writing. In reading, we have lots of different things, right? Reading for informational, reading for literature, foundational reading skills, reading in social studies, reading in science. We have lots of different ones. In writing, there are only 2 things you have to look at. Reading in K8, and writing in K8, and writing in the content areas. So that would include science, social studies, math, but writing in the content areas. And that content area separation is specifically targeted at 6 through 8. Okay? That's the distinction in writing, so you can start seeing the relationship between reading and writing. Like I mentioned, there are 10 CCR anchor standards. They're split into 4 categories. I can look at the different types and purposes of writing. How do you actually produce and distribute writing? How do you use research? And what range of writing should you do? So I have these packets for you. So if you look at writing, it is different from reading in that in reading, every standard was a different skill. If you look at writing, look at those first 3 standards. The first 3 are the biggies. If you look, it's still on that front page with the CCR, just with the CCR. The first 3 are the biggies. That basically says there are 3 main genres of writing that we want to make sure our students can do. That's the biggie. I want to have argument, in other words, persuasive. I need to be able to inform and explain, and I need to be able to have narrative writing. So it breaks down the 3 big genres of writing right from the beginning, and so we want to make that kind of very clear. Now right away, this ties back to this culture of excellence and the collaboration. If every grade is tied to this and being asked to do those same 3 genres, you can now see again why that collaboration across the board is so important, because we're wanting to develop those skills grade to grade to grade so that there's alignment. Now look at all the others. All of the others basically fit into doing those 3 types. So maybe I use research to help do it, or maybe I have to use technology to help do it, or maybe I need to make sure that I do those 3 types in a short setting and a long setting. But all of the others fit into those 3 main ideas. Okay, any questions about how it's structured in writing? So just like before, you want to make this manageable so they understand what is it we're really talking about for our students, because again, we're answering the question for the culture of excellence, what do our students need to learn? What do we expect they learn? So just like with reading, we came up with a name for each of the 10, you would want to do the same for writing. So in 2 minutes, because that's really about all it takes to do this step. It's not big. In 2 minutes, talk to the person next to you and come up with a name for each one. This is, and with your faculty, obviously, we would take some more time. But you wouldn't need more than 5 to 10 minutes of time. Why is this step valuable in terms of the big picture of a culture of excellence? How does taking a minute to do this, taking a minute to name the 10 things that are going to happen in every single grade, how do we relate it back to how are we helping to develop the culture of excellence?
Common language.
Common language across the board, which helps us then have collaboration. Heard Kevin say the continuum.
Clarity,
focus to what we're doing, priorities, and what we, answering that question, what is it that we are expecting them to learn in this grade? Absolutely.
I think too, even because you say the word focus and all of those words, and hopefully the discussion then can lead to what could go.
Yes.
Because we've packed our classrooms with so many projects and different things like that. So if we're really zeroing in on this, what fits with what we already do and what doesn't?
Sure. The amount of hours spent on writing poetry in elementary school. And I am not saying that that should necessarily go completely, but we have to kind of prioritize and look at what we're doing for our students. And if that is a piece of it, if that's somehow going to fit maybe into what I'm doing narratives, or maybe I even want them to use it for an informative explain or something like that too, making sure that it's tied into that bigger piece, that bigger focus of what is critical that our students learn as they move through the grades, rather than just, I love teaching this piece, so I'm going to do it. You know, we have a really incredible poetry slam that everybody comes to. You know, those are all valuable, but we have to rethink and focus everything into this bigger lens, culture of excellence. So we take a minute to do that. Here are the names, and I'll go through them quickly. I'll just put them all up so you can read them. Here are the names that the CCR writer, or CCSS, the Common Core writers, came up with. You can agree with them or disagree with them. They're pretty wordy, actually. But it just gives you an idea of what they thought they might call each of the 10. Again, you could have your own names at your grade or at your own school. What's important though is every teacher in that school has a common language, because every teacher is asked to focus on 10 things with writing. And I'll have this up on SharePoint so you can pull all of that later. So let's go back to the process then. We're re-going through the process. We did it with reading, now with writing. We started with structure and making sure we just had a pretty good general overview of what the structure of writing was. But obviously that was on a surface. If we're going to answer that bigger question of what do we expect students to learn, we've got to go deeper. Next, that comes with the vertical analysis. I'm going to take you a minute through a few of the standards because it's really eye-opening to see what they've done and how it relates to this bigger culture of excellence. So if you remember, this is just a quote I added up that goes back to what you had just said a little bit ago, Jane, about the national standards and benchmarks for Catholic schools. In those benchmarks, which basically say how to run an effective school, they have this as 7.1, that you have a curriculum that adheres to appropriate delineated standards, it's vertically aligned, it ensures that every student, so that goes back to those other questions of what do I do for the kids who aren't there or already are, has a rigorous and coherent, that school-wide journey, academic courses based on the standards and then rooted in Catholic values, that template with the inclusion of our faith. So this statement gives the reason kind of behind everything that we're trying to do as well. So remember vertical analysis, a nice easy process. We take one standard at a time, we read the CCR first because we want to look at the end goal first, where are students going? Then we go through each grade and we underline what is added in every grade so we can see what the progression is and what am I responsible in my grade and how is that different from the grade before, because I need to build off of what they had the year before. Now, the way I did this with reading is I just printed off the actual standards that had 3 grades at a time that you could look at. But what some principals said is, you know, it would be really helpful if I could have all the grades for one standard on one page. So I made that for you last night. If you turn the page and look at standard 1, no excuses. Every resource you could possibly need is there. Just look at standard 1, and I want us to actually walk through this one because it's going to show us some things, again, to the bigger picture when we later do this with our students. This is standard 1, which is all about arguments, correct?
Yeah.
Great. Do this process with maybe 1 or 2 people around you. Start with the CCR and then go to kinder, read kinder. When you go to first, only underline what is new in first grade. Same thing, as you go to second, only underline what is the new in second. Take a minute and go ahead and do that from K to 8. It could take us about 5 minutes to kind of really walk through, read each one, only underline what is new that is added. So if you did this process, it would be the same for standard 1, 2, and 3. They're very detailed and technical, right? Because those are the 3 core areas of writing, with argument, inform and explain, and narrative. But I want to walk you through how it's going to look a little different for the others. So if you would turn the page to standard 4. So you'll have to pass standard 2 and standard 3. I apologize I didn't page number them. I will add page numbers before I put it on SharePoint to make it easier for you. But find standard 4. Standard 4, if we read CCR, is about producing clear and coherent writing in which development, organization, and style are appropriate to task, purpose, and audience. So in other words, we're saying when we do standard 1, 2, or 3, we want to be sure it's coherent, and we want to make sure that it's appropriate to whatever the task is, the purpose, and the audience. Now take a minute to read K to 8, and look at this progression. It's very short, so just take a minute, look at it, underline what you see. We should be seeing a pattern. After 3rd grade, which has with guidance and support, the standard is the exact same. In other words, they believe that having coherent writing appropriate to task, purpose, and audience is critical regardless of your grade. It is always critical. If it is always critical, that means as a school, we need to be talking about it the same way with our students every single year. We need to always, when we're getting ready to do writing, we should be identifying, okay, what's the task we're doing? Let's write out what we're doing for writing. Purpose, what's our purpose? Are we arguing, are we informing, or are we having a narrative, narrating something? Okay, we're always giving the purpose. Audience, who are we selecting the audience? Is it me as the teacher? I hope that's not your audience very often, because then we just again learn to write for our teacher. But did we make the audience sharing with another grade, or an audience to mail off something, or whatever that might be? But you can see how that easy practice of identifying task, audience, and purpose could become a procedure to do throughout the school every time they write. If they did that from 3rd all the way to 8th grade, that is an ingrained practice they will always do when they write, and they'll be a better writer for it. So you can see how now, again, collaborating, that's culture of excellence, is so critical. If you go to standard 5, standard 5 is basically the revising and editing standard. You're going to see almost the same thing happen again. This is a critical writing skill that we don't wait until middle school to teach. It happens starting in kindergarten. And it should be consistent in how we address it throughout our entire school so it becomes a habit of the mind for the students every time they write. Of course, editing always begs the question, what do we edit for? Right? Some people like to have the pre-made poster with their little editing marks, and some people really care about spelling, and some people really care about parts of speech, and whatever it might be. They give a guide. If you look at 3rd grade right there, the in parentheses, what you edit for should demonstrate command of the language standards 1 to 3 from every grade up to 3rd grade. So in other words, in order to figure out how to determine what to edit, I need to look at my language standards, numbers 1 through 3, and make sure it's covering everything they've learned from K to 3rd grade. When I go to 4th grade, I still look at language standards 1 to 3, but I make sure they edit for everything they've learned from K to 4th grade. And then in 5th grade, from K to 5th grade. You don't only edit for a specific thing in each grade. You accumulate it from grade to grade based on what the language standards 1 to 3 say. So again, you see that school-wide journey that they might need to look at. Now, when you get to this, is this going to take some time to really talk about and develop and make that list? Absolutely, and that's okay. Again, we're working toward this bigger culture for them. It's okay to take time to get there. If you'll go to Standard 6, it's our technology standard. And I'll give you time now to kind of look at 6, 7, and 8. It's all the same thing. Remember, these are the add-in standards that all go into 1, 2, and 3 every time we write. And it's just like the others. It's very, very similar grade to grade to grade. There's only small differences. So again, it's just hitting home this, we've got to talk as a school. We have to talk as a school. We have to collaborate about what we're going to do across the board for our children. We have to have some common high-yield practices. So these standards are great because they go back and answer the question, what do we expect students to learn? How can we start collaborating to get them there? Okay, so here's really where I want to give you time to discuss and start thinking. Now that you see the bigger picture and where we're going, it makes us really re-reflect on how we've organized time in our school. How do we spend time with our faculty? What are we having them do? What are opportunities for them to collaborate? How have we guided that collaboration? Is it weekly, or could certain of these things be more beneficial in the summer or before school starts or on a full day? So what I want us to really take time to do is talk about, now's the time to plan for next year. How might we start to strategically structure our time differently at our school to help support the development of this type of culture? And remembering that this curriculum development process is just laying the initial foundations of that culture. Identifying what they need to know, how do we know it, and start to collaborate. So, talk to the people around you. What do you do now for time? What are you starting to think about how you might strategically completely change, or not change, or minor changes, the time you use now so that you can make this happen? Maybe it's the time or the day of the week we have meetings. What is it we do at meetings? Do we need to build in certain full day things, or do we want to have it week by week by week? Do we want to have it grade level teams, or should it always be all of us? Or do we need a balance of both? And always do it within, and I had skipped this slide, but it fits right into this. Always do it within the context of what are we already doing? Because there are pieces of this you might already be doing. There's some schools who do, across the school, a writer's workshop. They already have a common format in their school. What they need to do is reflect on, well, what are we actually covering in that writer's workshop? You know, let me go back to the standards of what the expectation is. But you always want to have this conversation with the reflection of, what are we already doing? We're not starting from scratch. But what are maybe things that we need to change, and how do we have to think about restructuring to best support that change? So take time to talk to the people around you where you can kind of share some ideas you maybe have had boiling and collaborate a bit with each other.